Let's look at what's happening at the NGX. Let's go back now and see what's sustaining our positive trend. We did hear that circular from the CBN extending for the forbearance. Well, more news coming from there. And Vincent Oshoma, securities dealer, Midpoint Capital Limited, is joining us to discuss this. Good afternoon, Vincent.
Good afternoon.
Vincent, CBN has temporarily lifted its cap on the AT1, that's capital, until March 2026, which allows banks to count more of their high-risk instruments, towards their capital buffers. But how much of this capital boost, how much of a capital boost does this really provide to banks that are struggling, especially during this transition?
Yeah, it's quite good that CBN is coming out with this clarification. Remember the initial announcement that it really impacted our market. And we saw a significant downward trend for like 2 days in the market due to the news. But this clarification, which made people believe because it was like a doomsday announcement. But with further clarification like this, we have seen that people are now instilling confidence in the banking stocks. And I think it's good for the banking sector. It's good. We are seeing major banks reacting positively with the clarification. For the other banks, I think with the capitalization that is also in view, they are still concerned about the smaller banks. What's going to happen to them? Are they going to meet the recapitalization? I think we'll continue to see the kind of announcement will affect discussion about their recapitalization move and also the talks about measure. So it's good for the industry.
Okay, but with the removal of the loan waivers and the imposition of, now we're seeing quarterly capital restoration plans, which the CBN is saying that the banks should provide. How quickly can undercapitalized banks, meet the new thresholds? And are there any strategies they should be focusing on to bridge any, remaining gaps?
Yeah, you notice that the major focus have to do with their capital adequacy ratio. And also for banks that are already have planned, because now we're already fast approaching the deadline for capitalization. I think a lot of those banks already have their own plans in terms of meeting the capital. And also the plan that CBN is giving them time. What CBN is trying to do is just to make sure that banks don't go on some excessive moves that will affect their capital, especially as we approach the recapitalization. I think it's a good thing for the banking sector and also for banks. Like I mentioned, some banks already have their plans. And for those ones that we already know that they are having issues, it will guide their discussion as they approach this deadline for the recapitalization. Also, the close monitoring by the CBN trying to tell them to submit their plans, I think is good for the industry.
Okay, so how are banks, investors reacting to this news, this new circular? What are we seeing for banking stocks, the performance, especially at intraday, possibly what we'll see at the close of trade?
It has been a muted reaction in terms of the stock because most of the stocks are actually relatively trading flat compared to their opening price. A few of them, one or two, that's just slightly below their prices. So it has not really impacted because people don't really see this thing. Because you remember when the last CBN came with the last public announcement and the data came with more clarification. A lot of those banks, we saw how they reacted in terms of bringing clarification. We understand that two banks are clearly out of this forbearance issue when you talk about GTCO and Stanbic, while the other banks also talk about their well positions to be able to meet this deadline and still be able to reward consumers in terms of their dividend. I think for the market now, it's just a muted reaction in the market, not a major reaction from the banks.
Okay, let's look at consumer goods. We did see that rally with Cadbury yesterday, and some Zango Sugar is in the news. Well, at intraday, one of the movers at intraday was driving. What are the news investors are, feasting on right now that's boosting that counter right now? Any earnings in the offing?
Yeah, we are approaching the end. We are actually in the ending season when banks, companies expect to start releasing their results this month, latest by the end of the month. And with most of these companies that you see that are experiencing some rally, they have had challenges recently due to the devaluation and that have affected a lot of FX losses, devaluation in their books. With much stability in the FX market and also with some level of relative stability in the economy, people are expecting that most of these companies, their results will show a series significant improvements in their H2 result, Q2 results. So I think the investors are actually positioning ahead of time, so that once this result, they are actually expecting positive performance from these companies. And also for Dangote Sugar, they talked about the measure. And when you now look at the current position of NASCON, we have seen significant appreciation in the price of NASCON. I think people are also expecting outside the FX stability, expecting some movement in Dangote Sugar. I think that would be some of the drivers of this movement in price.
And Vincent, I was going to say you're being telepathic there, because I was going to just ask you right now, what next for the merger? Since we've seen FX stability, we see return to profitability for consumer goods sectors, what's going to happen with Zango Sugar and NASCON? So from what you're saying, are we going to still have this merger?
Yeah, the last time that the measure application was rejected by SEC was that the chairman of the company mentioned that they are going to come back to the market to see how they can work on that measure, because some of the reservation from SEC does not mainly have to do with NASCON and Dangote. It has to do with Dangote rice. I think with some level of activity there, they are just trying to beat time. I think we should expect them to come back to the market. But in terms of when that will happen, but it's expected that the measure will be kickstarted very soon for them to conclude it.
Okay, so do you see the market closing in the green? We're just slightly in the flat line, not so far from 0.00% here. So do you see the market closing in the green or flipping to the red zone?
I see improvement. Investor sentiment is quite high. We have seen outside those stocks you've mentioned, we are still seeing some improvement, because as the last time it has improved about 0.15%. So relatively, we are seeing investors positioning for ahead of the release of these financials. And because of what is generally happening in the economy, and also with the downward trend in rates, we expect to see more interest in the capital markets, because we look at the Treasury bill rate and also the recently announced savings bonds rate. We have seen a reduction in rates, and people are looking at these factors, and we have seen the capital market gaining a lot of attention. I think that's some of the things that we're seeing moving the market upwards.
Thank you so much, Vincent Oshoma, securities dealer, Midpoint Capital Limited. Thank you for sharing your perspective on Business Incorporated.
Thanks for having me.